Blue Beetle was pretty mediocre. It's not great, it's not terrible. You've seen this origin story 100 times before. It's the kid who doesn't want powers but gets them anyway, and has to learn how to use them in order to save the day. You know, pretty bog standard stuff. What the film does get right is the main character, Jaime Reyes, played by Xolo Maridueña. He does a good job as the main character and comes across as very likeable. He's a young man who wants to do right by his family, and even though there are many obstacles in his life, he doesn't bitch and complain and just gets on with it. He doesn't want to kill people, but if pushed enough, he'll fuck up everyone. So at the very least, the movie got the main character correct. Then there's Jennifer Cord, the daughter of the original Blue Beetle, Ted Cord. Wasn't as annoying as I thought she would be, and ends up being a somewhat okay romantic interest for Jaime. She doesn't steal the limelight from Blue Beetle, and the actress who plays her does a good job. The fight scenes are done very well, and Blue Beetle has moments where he fucks up a lot of people, which is always good to see. The CGI for the most part is decent, especially the scene where Jaime transforms for the first time. Now for the bad, this film has an enormous amount of social messaging which really drags it down. The type of shit messages it has includes illegal immigrants crossing the border, Mexicans getting imprisoned by the CIA, the white woman receptionist purposefully says Jamie instead of Jaime, even the fact that several members of his family are illegals, and every white person in this movie is evil who do nothing but oppress all the Hispanic people they hire. Now, if it was one or two comments, I could ignore it, but the film waterboards you with a political message every 10 minutes that it makes you roll your eyes so many times, you end up looking like a Mortal Kombat character during a fatality. The only good white person is Ted Cord, who's not even on screen, and the only reason he is good is because his Latina wife tells him not to be evil.
What a load of bollocks.
What's even worse is that Ted Cord only got control of his company because of sexism, as Susan Sarandon, his sister, who was so much better at running the company than Ted, only got overlooked by her father because she has a vagina. Speaking of Susan, she is a one-dimensional villain with no real motivation other than saying several times throughout the film everything she does is for the greater good, but she never elaborates as to what that is. Well, that's because it doesn't mean anything other than being a setup for a certain scene that happens at the end of the film. There's Jaime's sister, who is pretty annoying, and that's because she is comic relief, which is a problem when the movie isn't funny. She does get better in the second half, but that's only because the comedy is toned down a little and she isn't making a terrible joke every 5 minutes. The plot is also quite predictable, and there are many setups that you can easily tell where they are going, such as a man who Susan Sarandon calls the wrong name all the time, who unsurprisingly betrays her, shouting out his real name as he does.
Absolutely predictable.
So like I said, the comedy is cat shit, and it doesn't work for two reasons. Either it's really cringe shit, like the innocent grandmother who ends up wielding a massive minigun, a joke we have seen a million times before, or the jokes and references are aimed exclusively at the Hispanic audience, which left me and most people in the theatre wondering what the fuck are these people talking about. The henchman to Susan Sarandon and secondary antagonist of the film, he's just a bigger red version of Blue Beetle. He has some backstory, but it's not very interesting, and for the most part he is just generic. The film also needs to be cut down, as it ran roughly 20 to 30 minutes longer than it should have. If they had simply cut out all of that social dogshit messaging, it would have been a much better story with tighter pacing. There's also some contrivances as well, like in one scene, they need to break into the Cord building, and George Lopez just so happens to have the device they need. Or when the security to the building is obviously hacked, nobody goes outside the camera room to investigate. Or the fact that George Lopez is easily able to pilot the Blue Beetle ship despite having no knowledge as to how. Finally, we have the actors and director themselves saying stupid shit like the villains are the white military-industrial complex, or that the film includes themes of displacement, colonialism, and gentrification because that's what people want to watch in a superhero movie. This bitch-like behaviour just bleeds into the plot and has made the film much worse overall. Now, I'm going to go into spoilers, so if you don't want to watch it, then stop watching. It begins with Jaime returning to his family after graduating from college, but when he comes home, he learns that his family's situation is pretty severe, as Cord Industries has tripled the rent and is trying to push the people out of the area. Now Jaime, who has a degree in law, realizes that the diploma he worked so hard to achieve is only good for wiping your ass with, as the only job he can get is cleaning Susan Sarandon's villa. One day he notices Susan arguing with Jennifer Cord, her niece and Ted Cord's daughter, so he steps in to help her, but ends up getting both him and his sister fired. Feeling bad for his situation, she offers him a job at Cord Industries, but when he shows up the next day, it turns out that Jennifer has stolen the Scarab, which is a piece of alien technology that Susan Sarandon wants to study in order to help make weapons out of. So with no other choice, she tells Jaime to take the burger box it's hidden inside of, and to not open the box no matter what. So of course he's going to fucking open it, but when he does, the Scarab chooses him as the new host, and attaches itself to his spine. He is forcibly suited up and flown around the city until eventually returning home. So since the Scarab is grafted onto his spine, he goes to look for Jennifer for a way to remove it. But when he eventually finds her, she is in the middle of the street being shot at by Cord security.
Right.
Jaime then rescues her and takes her back to his house, and she explains that the only person who has the most information on the Scarab was her father, who disappeared years ago. But he did leave behind information on it on his computer at his old home. But in order to access it, they need Ted's watch, which is located inside the Cord building. So they have to break into the building. But luckily for them though, George Lopez just so happens to have a device that can disable their security. So once they get the watch, the three of them travel all the way to her father's house. They open up a secret bunker that leads directly into the Blue Beetle base. George Lopez then calls Batman a fascist before breaking into Ted Cord's computer, where we learn that the Scarab cannot be removed without it killing him. Now at the same time this is happening, Cord Industries raids Jaime's house, but before they can just randomly execute his family in the middle of the street, Jaime arrives to try and stop them. Unfortunately for him, his father dies of a heart attack and he is taken hostage. Jaime's family then join up with Jenny Cord and use the big Blue Beetle ship to attack the fort that is holding Jaime. So Jaime eventually gets free, he fucks up all the security before having a fight with the main villain. Jaime wins but doesn't end up killing him. Instead, his Scarab makes the villain remember that Susan Sarandon was an asshole to him and turned him into a weapon. So because he no longer wants to live anymore, he decides to blow himself and Susan up. The film ends with Jaime boning Jenny Cord, and she gets to take over Cord Industries. There's also a post-credit scene which has Ted Cord sending a message to his computer saying that he is alive.
Who gives a shit?
So that was Blue Beetle, a pretty mediocre movie with many unnecessary problems being forced into it, all because the director couldn't keep his shitty politics from infecting his story. This isn't the first time this has happened, and it won't be the last.